thanks to Mark and the events committee for helping out with this annual visit. This is the second year that we're doing it virtually. We usually do it in April, and this year we are doing it in April. Last year, if you remember April, it was kind of a scramble. So we did it in May. But hopefully next year, it'll be such that we can all do it in person again. And I just, you know, when you go to a cemetery, and that's what we're doing, it's a pretty solemn thing. And you have to act appropriately in this presentation as well. We're really the same way. And I have to start off by saying that I haven't attended so many Zoom funerals and Zoom shivas, and known as many young people who've lost their parents, and I've lost friends and stuff. So if I could, you know, dedicate this particular presentation, which is, you know, it's not a happy thing. We're going to be talking about Greenwood Cemetery and Peter Cooper's gravesite there, and hopefully this will help. If people have their own loss, this will help them process some of that as well. So this is a joint thing between the Cooper Union Alumni Association, Cooper Union History Project. Let me go to the next screen. Here's a map of Greenwood Cemetery, and that's where Peter Cooper's gravesite is, kind of smack dab in the middle of Greenwood Cemetery. And we usually enter at the Prospect Park entrance in order to get there. Here's a Google map. So there's the F train to the Prospect Park, and then you just walk straight down to this particular gate, the Prospect Park gate, and then you just kind of walk across the cemetery to get to Peter Cooper's grave, which is right there. If you're driving, then you drive around this way and slowly at 15 miles an hour to get there. And it's a circle right smack dab in the middle of Greenwood Cemetery. I highly recommend that people physically go, because architecturally and spatially, the first time I went, it made an enormous impression on me how central Peter Cooper was and well known within New York City, and you can just tell. This is the 2012 trip in February. Gary said he was there. I don't know if he happens to be in this photo. I know I could see other people like Rocco Setter on the left. I could see Corinna Tipton in the middle. So what we found in 2012 was that going in February is a bad idea. So we moved it to April for various reasons. And here's then one of the subsequent trips. So you can see how there's all these other Cooper family graves surrounding it, and then in the middle is this monument with 4 sides, and 3 sides are devoted to Peter Cooper, and the third is devoted to Sarah. However, Sarah died before, his wife died before Peter Cooper, so it's just a plaque. I do not believe they moved her remains. I do not know where Sarah Bedell's Cooper's remains are, but there are anecdotes about Peter Cooper going to visit his wife's grave. So these are the first 2 plaques, which I'll read in case your screen resolution isn't so good. So it says, Peter Cooper, patriot, philanthropist, sage, pioneer under the free institutions of a new nation in works of industrial enterprise and of far-sighted benevolence, founder of the Cooper Union for the Advancement of Science and Art, which he conceived when a poor apprentice and realized after many years of sacrifice and devotion, thus becoming the first in America personally to administer large private fortune for the public good. Distinguished as municipal legislator, later inventor, mechanic, and manufacturer, he was a leader in providing his native city with its police and fire departments, its public school system, and the Croton water. That's what it says, Croton water, doesn't say Croton water viaduct or Croton water system. He designed and constructed the first steam locomotive built in America, that's the Tom Thumb, received the Bessoir Medal as the father of the American iron trade, was one of the originators of the transatlantic cable. The transatlantic cable definitely would not have happened without him, and furnished the means by which this undertaking was revived and accomplished. Simple and devout in spirit, industrious and honorable in business, he devoted his genius and energy not more to useful private enterprises than to the direct service of mankind, chiefly through the gift of that education which leads to self-help, self-respect, and good citizenship. Inspired by faith and infinite love working through immutable law, he lived to a great age in the gratitude and affection of his fellow men. Born February 12th, 1791, died April 4th, 1883, his 93rd year. I want to make a note that, and next slide will show, that April 4th is the correct date of his death and is reproduced many places. However, we are going to find at least two places where they got it wrong. And one of the most significant places is right in front of the Cooper Union, where it says April 3rd. Now, this is a statue that was put up by his son, commissioned from August St. Gaudens, and it's the wrong date. Now, the family was at his side, and I think it was Tuesday night on April 3rd, they would have been there, keeping vigil with him, but he didn't die till the following morning on April 4th. So they may have misremembered the date, and then they told St. Gaudens what to put on the statue. But I guarantee you it's April 4th, not April 3rd. There's a poem then on the back of the monument, which is written by Joachim Miller. I don't know whether I have to speak it with an accent because there are some words that don't quite rhyme exactly, but I'll just read it. Give honor and love forevermore to this great man gone to rest. Peace on the dim Plutonian shore, rest in the land of the blessed. I reckon him greater than any man that ever drew sword in war. I reckon him nobler than king or khan, braver and better by far in war. And wisest he in this whole wide world land, of hoarding till bent and gray, for all you can hold in your cold dead hand is what you have given away. That's my favorite line. So whether to wander the stars or to rest, forever hushed and dumb, he gave with a zest and he gave his best. Give him the best to come. That theme about giving away his money is going to show up in another reading that I do as well, a few readings actually, and this theme of taking those dollars to your to meet your maker. Now, Sarah Bedell, his wife, there's a plaque for her, but you can see down at the bottom she died in 1869, whereas Peter Cooper didn't die till 1883. And as I said, I seriously doubt they moved her remains. Because I don't think that's something they did back in the 1880s. For 56 years, a faithful and beloved wife, devoted and exemplary as a mother, patient and wise in beneficence, industrious, self-denying, and in all things charitable, a good neighbor, a true friend, a bright companion, a wise counselor. She cheered and sustained her husband. She kept the home she loved, labored for her country. She followed Christ. Her children and her grandchildren call her blessed, and her works praise her in the gates. Born 1795, married 1813, died 1869. That's 56 years, over 50 years. They were married in her 77th year. Now, I showed you a photo that showed all the other Cooper family members that are sprinkled around. And when we do the visit, I print this page out and I hand it to everybody so they can kind of see, oh, who's the child, who's the grandchild. I think there's at least one great grandchild. So you see to the left, Sarah Amelia Hewitt. You see to the right, Edward Cooper. Those are the two surviving children of Peter Cooper. If you know If you've seen the movie, the documentary, we know that there were also 4 children who died when they were young, but these are the 2 surviving children. And then Sarah Amelia married Abram Stevens Hewitt and became Sarah Amelia Hewitt. Edward Cooper married Cornelia, and I will show you those plaques, but there are a whole bunch of plaques. Then you see Sarah's children. Let me count: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And Edward had 2 children, 1, 2. So that's 9 grandchildren, and then everybody else is a great grandchild that's there. Here's Edward Cooper, the oldest son, and the first child, Peter Cooper, which would be Peter's great-grandchild, born 1860, died 1866. So that's another child that died at a young age. And then their children, Edith Cooper, married to Lloyd Stevens Price, is below. And there's a plaque for Abram Stevens Hewitt, and Sarah Amelia is also mentioned on the same plaque. And I don't necessarily need to read all this about Abram Hewitt, but I do want to show you this column, which you can see it right there. It was first erected at Greenwood, and then in 1932, it was relocated to the Hewitt building. And so many of us walked into the Hewitt building when it was still there, not the new academic building, and saw this column just with the name Hewitt at the bottom, just there. And then, of course, when the new NAB was erected, they moved it back to Greenwood Cemetery. So it moved from Greenwood Cemetery to the Hewitt building and then back to Greenwood Cemetery. And there's this plaque on the back of it. And there's the Hewitt building. That's a shot taken from 30 Cooper Union. They made a movie of its destruction. And here's a shot that I took during the few moments where you could see the facade of the Ukrainian church before they started to put up the scaffold and build the new academic building, which is now in its place. And I think should be renamed the Hewitt building, personally. Now, there's this statement in the Mac biography, which I have to my left over here, about how it's easy to think of Peter Cooper always as this guy with a big white beard. And of course, that's only much, much later in his life. So I've collected a few photos. And this is the one we think is the earliest. And it is also the most mysterious because that can't be Peter Cooper's grandchild. We don't know whether it's male or female because there was a fashion back then of dressing male children up in female clothing. So it's unclear whether it's male or female, but we've been in touch with the Ringwood Manor historian, and we're all in agreement that this is not a grandchild, even though maybe it's on Wikipedia and they say, or you can find a website that claims it is. It's the wrong age, we know what the other grandchildren look like. It's too early. And we have a theory that this is actually the first daughter of it's a grandniece, basically. Here's, oops, I went the wrong way, sorry. Here's this passage from the autobiography of Peter Cooper that says that 10 years into their marriage, Sarah's sister died, and then Sarah's sister husband died also, and they left this orphan daughter called Martha Claves, and she grew up, so they took her into their household. And then she was courted and married to Daniel Tiemann, and they had a whole bunch of children. So the theory is that this was the first grandchild, but it's actually grandniece, that would have been born to someone who was kind of raised as a third child in the Peter Cooper household. And that works out time-wise that he would have then posed for a picture with this this daughter or son of this woman who grew up in a household. Just one last statement about the household. I don't want to get too far into trivia, but his daughter was Sarah, his wife was Sarah, and there's also living in that same house 2 aunts, a third of which was called Sarah. His name was Sarah. So I don't know how they refer to each other, whether one was auntie and one was Sarah and the other was mom or whatever, but it could have got, must have gotten pretty confusing. And then here's Martha as well, growing up in that household. Here's another photo of a pretty young Peter Cooper, again, without the beard yet, but with the glasses. Here, the beard is starting to grow in, but he still has dark hair, not white. Here's a very famous Matthew Brady portrait of Peter Cooper. Here is one of 2 plates. They're very close to each other, but you can see that Sarah's hands move in the other plate. So they're 2 different photos, but taken at the same exact seating. And there is, therefore, obviously Edward Cooper at the top, Sarah, younger at the left, Peter sitting there with his wife, Sarah. There's 2 Sarahs in this photo, the wife of Peter and his daughter. Now here's Peter starting to look a little more like the Peter Cooper we know. The white beard is really starting to grow in. Here it's getting pretty big, and this might be one of his grandchildren. I haven't put any work into identifying that one. And then here's the Peter Cooper we tend to think of, and that's on my shirt as well. Here's a photo I really love of Peter Cooper taking his own cart, driving it himself, and coming over to the Cooper Union. What we think of now as the back of the Cooper Union was the front of the Cooper Union during Peter Cooper's time. So this is the north side of the building that we're looking at. And this brings me to, I believe, the first reading. So I'll be doing 4 readings, which I always do when we're out on the gravesite. We've been working on different ways of doing the memorial, and over the years, since 2012, I think we've got it down pretty well now. So this is from a newspaper clipping. It says, it will be remembered that up to the time of Mr. Cooper's death, a crowd of persons were in the habit of awaiting his appearance at his office to ask assistance of him. Many of his friends advised him to disregard their appeals, as he could not know whether or not they were deserving, and his servants showed a disposition to drive them away. Disposition. The great philanthropist, however, did not heed the admonitions of the one and rebuked the haste of the other. Quote, "It pleases me," unquote, he would say, "to give each of these people something." And there's talk about whether he gave them 25 cents or 2 quarters, 1 quarter or 2 quarters, he would decide. But he would get a huge pile of quarters and just give them out to anybody who waited online. Those who understand the character and discernment of Mr. Cooper and are aware of the fact that in all his calculations upon human nature, he rarely, if ever, made a mistake, will believe that the reason for his indiscrimination, the reason why he gave to each his share, was that by so doing, he should be sure not to permit the really deserving to go away empty-handed. In other words, he had, there is reason to believe, decided that if only 1 out of every dozen that he helped was in real need, he was amply repaid. So this is the first example of Peter Cooper's generosity, about how he didn't care whether or not your parents made this amount of money or that amount of money, or whether you were a criminal just trying to get a fast deal or whatever. He felt it was his Christian duty, and he wasn't going to investigate you or ask you questions. He was just going to give you money. Here is another photo I really love. It used to be at 30 Cooper Square, blown up very big. I don't know that it's there anymore. And the Cooper Union History Project has put some effort into identifying the gentleman on the right and where this is. So it turns out, so Peter Buckley, who is the Cooper Union historian up to his retirement at least, is of the opinion, and I agree with him, that this is Dr. William Rimmer, who was director of the Female Art School from 1865 to 1870. So that gives us a feel for the date of this photograph. And it's on the west side of the third floor, looking south. I put a little map down at the bottom so you can get an idea of what the building third floor looked like at that time. The museum was on the fourth floor above, and there's a light well. You can see the light well on the left, right in the middle of the building. And this is probably from the time when the building was only 4 stories high, not 6 stories high. A second theory is that Mr. Cooper is with William James Linton, director of the engraving department under Rimmer, because he also had a beard. I've put photos of Rimmer and of Linton down below, and I think maybe you agree with me that Rimmer is perhaps the more well-dressed. The hair seems to line up, even though it's very, very small. So I think we're right. I think that's Dr. William Rimmer. Here's, speaking of the art school, Susan Carter was not the first director of the art school. I just showed you a former director. I believe she was the first female director of the art school, the female art school. There was a male art school at night. And she has written this beautiful document called Recollections. And here's a passage from her talking about, again, the character of Peter Cooper. During the first year of my acquaintance with Mr. Cooper, I frequently told him stories of our pupils who were very poor, were making extraordinary efforts to remain in the art school. Finding, however, that such cases could never be mentioned without his immediately volunteering to aid them, as a matter of honor, I soon ceased to speak to him of instances which would enlist his sympathy. In spite of this, however, now and then some case came up of a girl in unusually difficult circumstances. She had perhaps come from the far west or the south, was away from her friends, or was one of many children, or had saved painfully the money to keep her at the Cooper Union. The story was told to explain or illustrate some outside matter, and it did not occur to me that Mr. Cooper would feel it as an appeal to his charity, but so constant was his habit of sympathy, so strong his desire to do good, that on such occasions his hand would be instantly in his pocket, and before I could perceive what he was about, a bill was slipped into my hand, as if he were hardly willing I should think what he was doing. And he said, this may help her perhaps to get better food, or you can see if she needs anything specially. Do not say where it came from. These words were spoken in a tone so full of kindness and yet so absolutely without ostentation that I never did tell the recipient the feeling of Mr. Cooper was too sacred a prompting to be soiled with any touch of earthly vanity. Truly, he did not wish his left hand to know what his right hand was doing, and by instantly speaking on some other subject, he tried to make me forget the incident which had occurred. Here's a passage published in the newspaper quoting the funeral oration given by the Reverend Dr. Collier. He lies there. This is a quote from a very long speech that the Reverend made. He lies there in his coffin, wholly harmless and undefiled as a merchant and a man of business. He never made a promise, even of the worth of an acorn, which he did not keep. Here lies a man who never owned a dollar that he dared not take up to the great white throne, and who never owed a dollar that he could not and would not pay. So you see how that's kind of a reflection also of the poem that's on the back of the monument. And finally, I'm going to take a drink. This is where I break down. I love this passage. It's this case. There are many tellings of Peter Cooper's funeral procession. This one by Susan Carter is so beautiful, and I will do my best to get through it, or try to find a volunteer to read it for me. But let me know if you need me to. Let me know if you need me to chip in, Barry. Yeah, when I get to the second graph is where I have the most trouble. New Yorkers know the touching and unique spectacle at his funeral, and again, she gets the date wrong. He died on April 4th, but maybe the funeral procession she's talking about was on April 6th. and remember the unbroken line of respectful and sorrowing faces which silently contemplated the funeral procession in its course of 3 miles from the church in 20th Street to the Battery. That church no longer exists, but I have one photo of it. Broadway was absolutely emptied of business and vehicles while the body of this good friend of everyone in New York was being carried to the grave. Every class of society was represented in the great crowd, and rich and poor alike had the same sorrowful look on their faces. In the poorer cross streets, mothers held up their little children to look at the funeral, and rough-looking and wretched people of every nation seemed touched with a better feeling, while as the hearse passed between the great business houses of Broadway, burly and prosperous merchants stood silent and with heads uncovered. The sight looking down the main street of the city was most impressive. At that hour of the afternoon, the great artery of New York is always crowded with carriages and vehicles. When you see photographs of New York, they had to expose it for so long that everybody is blurred out, but they were always crowded actually in reality. Horses and wagons are closely wedged together and the mass moves along almost solid for miles. But now when the funeral carriages turned 2 abreast into Broadway from 4th Street, not another vehicle broke the stillness, and the bare pavement was seen as far as the eye could reach. On either broad sidewalk was the mass of upturned, silent faces. When the procession reached Fulton and Wall Streets, it seemed nearly impossible to believe that life could be kept back from where these streets joined Broadway, yet such was the love for Mr. Cooper that all remained silent to the end. And it was only when the carriages which had followed the hearse turned again, after leaving it into Broadway, that the crowd surged back and life resumed its usual course, ebbing and flowing as before. They shut down the stock exchange, businesses stopped, courts closed. The idea that anybody in New York would not know the name Peter Cooper was impossible. So this year I went last Saturday, a week and a half ago, out to the site and decorated the grave. There's a photo I took of the grave decorated. Vincent, we came up with the pattern, and this is something the Alumni Association used to do. Rocco Cetera sent me this passage from a book that mentions the Alumni Federation. The Alumni Association was the first Alumni Association, but there were then separate Alumni Associations, and they all were a federation, and then they were finally later all joined together into one, absorbed into the Cooper Union Alumni Association. But at the time that this was written, so it mentions the celebration of Founders Day, the decoration of the grave, which is what now we've revived that tradition, the decoration of the monument, which of course we all know on February 12th, we do that every year. And then there's the decoration of the bust of Peter Cooper in the Hall of Fame. And I hope there's a gentleman, alumni, who keeps talking about that bust. And I wish we would arrange an alumni excursion out to, I think it's in Queens, to the Hall of Fame, or it's in Queens or the Bronx, to see the Hall of Fame and see the bust of Peter Cooper there. And maybe, I don't know whether they'll let us decorate it. If it's outside, and perhaps they will. So here is, there's Vincent, second from the left. And you can see the decorating behind him. 1, 2, third from the right, that's Jack Eichenbaum. He is the Queens historian, Queensborough historian, and a Cooper alum as well. And so these are the web addresses of the Cooper Union. And I just want to make clear that, I personally am not the Cooper Union History Project, though I do run its website. And One of the major sites is from Sango Year. You see her up at the top right. She has written a series of historical articles about Cooper Union's history. Chris Currow, you may know. Rocco, I mentioned. Peter Buckley, of course. I've made mention of Robert Topper, is a chemistry professor who has been doing a lot of research into the history of the chemistry department. C.B. Wayne, Kelly. So there's no official membership of the Cooper Union History Project. However, if you have a website where you have some memorabilia up or something like that, then please just send me the link. There's if you go to notnicemusic.com CUHP, you'll find a link to my email, and you can send me a link, or there's other ways. So the Cooper Union History Project is involved in a bunch of stuff. The Friends of Cooper Union actually did that first trip in 2012. In 2014, on behalf of the Cooper Union History Project, I returned in April. And in 2017, the event became a joint Cooper Union History Project and Cooper Union Alumni Association event. With that, if usually when we're out there, if there's somebody who has a recollection of the Cooper Union, or has heard a story about Peter Cooper or about the Hewitt family and wants to share it, we can unmute you, or you can unmute yourself. How we want to do that, Mark?
Yeah, if folks have any questions or they have any comments they'd like to share, any recollections, they're free to unmute themselves. Hey, Barry, I've got a question. When you mentioned the Hall of Fame, which we now found out is in the Bronx, what Hall of Fame are you speaking of?
It is what used to be NYU in the Bronx, and my brother was the last engineering student to have gotten his degree from NYU, and then they abolished the engineering curriculum until they resurrected it more recently. So it is what is called University Heights in the Bronx, West Side.
Right. I guess my question, though, was what is this Hall of Fame?
It is the Hall of Fame. When people talk about the Hall of Fame, that is what they mean. It's a colonnaded area outdoors in the school. Yes, it's a colonnaded area, and there are busts of famous people there. Peter being one of them, but it's the Hall of Fame.
It's called the Hall of Fame of Great Americans.
Just Google it. It's there. You'll find it.
Hall of Fame of Great Americans.
Thank you.
It's the only Hall of Fame.
No, thanks. But because when you say the Hall of Fame, I mean, there are so many halls of fame, right? So
yeah,
that's what I was trying to get.
The baseball Hall of Fame. It is the Hall of Fame.
I didn't know if it was the Cooper Union Hall of Fame.
That is right.
So
of Great Americans.
It's the Hall of Fame of Great Americans. Great.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Again, I haven't been there yet. So I have been to Ringwood Manor a couple times and taken some tours there. And I've also, the Greenwood Cemetery is open 7 days a week. Any other stories, recollections? There's unfortunately an awful lot of myth making about Peter Cooper. I seriously recommend the Mac biography. It's excellent and a well-researched source, and it's pretty easily available. It's not necessarily published anymore, but you can easily find on eBay or on Amazon or something like that copies of it and buy it. It's like maybe 30-40 bucks. We also have on the website, if you've got memorabilia, we love that. Mike Essel has a pretty good collection. I've got a good collection. Chris Currow's got a good collection. Take photographs of your collection of Cooper memorabilia and send it off to me, and we can stick it up on the website so other people can share in that. I've got a pretty extensive collection of Cooper memorabilia, I must say, but Mike Essel's got some pretty cool stuff too. But we welcome I mean, if you've got, your yearbook, why don't you scan the yearbook and we'd love to see stuff in there. So, whether or not I have space on my own personal website, and by the way, Not Nice Music itself is no longer a business, so this is not a publicity stunt or anything for my my former doing business as, but it's a very memorable name, Not Nice Music, so I keep it alive. And the CUHP website underneath it is transportable, so if there's a need to copy the entire CUHP directory over to somebody else's website, that's I've set it up in such a way that it can be easily moved as well. But I didn't register a domain name under CUHP. That seemed a bit, unnecessary.
All right, well, doesn't look like there are any other questions or comments.
Oh, here's a question. Any Cooper Hewitt family members ever participate in the memorials? Not in my visit. The visit that we have is the Cooper Union Alumni Association visit. So we don't contact the family itself and say, hey, would you like to join us? Because it's explicitly a Cooper Union event. However, the Cooper Union History Project was involved very deeply in the purchase of the Cooper Union family papers for the archive, for the Cooper Union Library and Archive. And as you may know, a member of the Cooper Union family, it must be on the board of the trustees. And we had an exhibit, and we were going to have an opening, but it interfered with far too many other things. So we did a kind of closing instead event. And the trustee, who is the Cooper family member, and he brought his daughter and maybe some other relatives, and they came to that event. And it was a wonderful exhibit, and it's a wonderful collection that doesn't have any documents by Peter Cooper himself, though it did have 2 signatures in the collection. So, and I have one of them, which I have to, when I die, give back to the Cooper Union. And Jim Lubavitch has the other one. And but the most striking thing in the exhibit is there's a military record for Peter Cooper's father. It's a book that includes lines of many Revolutionary War soldiers, and you can see Peter Cooper's father's name in that book. And I think that's just spectacular. There's also some wonderful letters and notes and things of that. The collection, I don't know, has been completely cataloged yet and worked out, but the archive did put up a display about it that was in the library itself. Could you highlight some of the main holdings in the library? Oh gosh, I mean, they got everything. It's the archive, right? In fact, that's one of my main hopes, is that, and we have a new archivist now. The previous archivist retired, and I have been in communication with the new archivist, and the hope is that we might be able to get some weekend hours, because right now the archive is only available during weekdays, 9 to 5 or whatever, when most of us are working. So I have come to the library to try to do research, but so the library itself might be open on the weekend, but the archive isn't. And,
Hey, Barry, just so you know, and for those of you who are online, the CUAA actually hosted a session back in February as part of our first Tuesday series, which was a walk through the Peter Cooper archives. And I've just sent the link.
so that's on YouTube.
I've just sent. Yeah, I've just posted the link in chat. If anyone's interested in watching that back, that way you can listen to Lisa Norberg's talk. Lisa Norberg is the head librarian at the Cooper Union. and she gave a talk about some of the holdings in the archive.
Thank you for reminding me of her name. As I get older and older, I start forgetting names more and more. So I blanked, but Lisa Norberg, yes, is the current archivist. And there's a lot of activity going on with the library in terms of digitizing more and more and more of the collection. I believe there's a huge project to get the recordings in the Great Hall digitized, which I'm very much looking forward to. And there are on the website of the Cooper Union archive, you can find annual reports, you can find historic photographs, you can find original documents. It's a great online resource as well, which is growing every year.
And for folks who, just so you all know, we are recording tonight's session, so we'll be available for viewing sometime in the next few weeks. But for those of you who are watching this back and are not here live and can't see what we're putting in chat, if you are looking for that recording, if you go to YouTube and do a simple search for Cooper Union Talk Toast, you'll find the very first link is a link to an event called Talk and Toast, a trip through the Peter Cooper archives. And that's on the Cooper Union YouTube channel. And that is the recording that we just mentioned a moment ago, in case you're interested in checking that out. All right. So it looks like we've wrapped up, and we have a lot of thank yous from the audience. So my thank you back to all of you for participating. All right. That's
just for the record, while we're recording, I've shown some Cooper Union memorabilia, and I want on the recording the fact that this gold CU hat is not Cooper Union memorabilia. I went to Denver and Boulder with my sons. This is Colorado University. So I don't, historically, we like to not be lying, and I wanted to wear a hat, and I kind of use this as my Cooper Union hat, but it's the Broncos or whatever. It's not the, we should have a hat. We should have a Cooper Union hat.
I think it's the Buffaloes, but
whatever.
Regardless,
Yeah,
it's definitely not the Pioneers. We know that.
Definitely not the Pioneers.
All righty, folks. So thank you all for joining us this evening. Thank you especially to Barry for being with us tonight and for doing this again. I know it's something that's near and dear to his heart and near and dear to the History Project's heart. So I'm glad that we at the CUAA were able to help facilitate this. It's been wonderful the last 2 years. We've recorded this again, as I mentioned, and it will be available online in the coming weeks. And we'll make sure to let those of you who registered know when that happens. And we'll share it more broadly as well. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening. Thanks again, Barry. Take care, everyone.
Thank you, Barry.
Thanks, Gary.
Good night. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
Well
Yes,
done,
thank you.
Barry.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.